Again, welcome everyone to Connections Live, our Noetic webinar series designed to help you deepen your sense of interconnection to inform and inspire. We are so glad that you have joined us. And thank you for tuning in to hear our special guest today, ion scientist Dr. Arnaud Delorme, as we will get a sneak peek into his new book, Why Our Minds Wander, Understand the Science, and Learn How to Focus Your Thoughts. My name is Andrea Livingston, and I'm the Associate Director of Engagement and Partnerships here at IONS, and I will be your host for this 60-minute session. We do have back in Zoom support from Mark, who will help you out with any technical difficulties you may have. So you can just send a chat to hosts and panelists, and he'll get right back to you. And we are recording this webinar, and a video will be posted on our website later today. So we are sharing that link in the chat so you can rewatch today's presentation or share it with someone who you love. We'll also be emailing that out to all participants, but you can find that on our website there. And as a scientific nonprofit, our funding is almost entirely from memberships and donations. So we are always so grateful for your support. And if you're not a member, consider joining with a gift of $60 per year or a sustaining membership of just $10 a month, which gives you access to hundreds of hours of video recordings on the topics of science, consciousness, and interconnection. So we'd love to have you join us if you're not already a member. Okay, so I know we are all excited for the topic of mind wandering. I know I'm excited to get some tips and hear the science behind it. So let me just introduce our presenter, Arnaud Delorme. So Arnaud, PhD, has been studying human consciousness for the last 20 years. He is a scientist here at IONS, a CNRS research director in Toulouse, France, and a senior research scientist at the University of California, San Diego. He's a longtime Zen meditator and recipient of several research prizes. He is author of some 160 peer-reviewed publications. Just a moment. There we go. Getting over a cold. Excuse me. So he is a longtime Zen meditator and recipient of several research prizes. He's the author of some 160 peer-reviewed publications and is best known for his work on the neural correlates of mind wandering, which we're going to hear about today. And we're chatting out a link to his book, and we'll be hearing about that now. So Arnaud, take it away.
Thank you, Andrea. So let me share my screen. So why are our minds wander, or why not? So that's the topic of the presentation today, and this is linked to the release of my book. I want to mention Jonathan Schooler, who is a distinguished professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, wrote the foreword. Is a good friend of mine, and so let's jump right into the topic. And first, why this topic? And so this goes back to when I was about 11, and I was in the courtyard of my school in the Paris suburbs. And before that, I didn't know what I wanted to do, like most kids. But at some time, the thought struck me, well, I want to know why I'm here. And in my upbringing, Western society, that meant you need to be a scientist and research the brain. Until I understood, there is more than the brain, more to consciousness than the brain. And so we'll see all that in the presentation. And first, I want to give a quote by William James about the stream of consciousness. So consciousness is in constant change, not we're seeing, nor hearing, nor reasoning, nor willing, nor recollecting, nor expecting, nor loving, nor hating, in 100 other ways we know our mind to be alternatively engaged. And that's kind of the definition of mind wandering. Our mind is everywhere. It's like the monkey mind in the Hindu traditions. And we see our mind wandering, for example, when we are reading a book and we start to drift And then we become aware, oh, we haven't really captured what we were reading for the past 2 minutes. That's where we were the most aware of our mind wandering, but it happens basically all the time. And we estimate, based on some experiments, I'll show you that people spend more than 50% of their time mind wandering. What's interesting is that this is William James, was a professor in Harvard at the beginning of the 20th century. But there's also a Buddhist scholar, which and there's a quote here that's very similar to that, and says, "There is no self that stands that mentality to which characteristics and event accrue and from which they fall away, leaving it intact at death. The stream of consciousness flowing through many lives is as changing as a stream of water." And again, this refers indirectly to mind wandering and the flow of consciousness that's changing as the stream of water. So mind wandering is also experienced when reading a book, but mostly, and a lot of you will be able to relate to that experience when you're meditating. That's when I became most aware of my mind wandering, and why I became interested in this topic, because as I started meditating, my mind was everywhere. And you're supposed to focus on your breath, for example, but your mind go all these tangents. Here, for example, we have somebody meditating. Did I remember to lose my belt? And his mind goes into all these explanation just to realize at the very end, oh, wait a minute, I'm not even wearing belt. So that is mind wandering. So is mind wandering a good thing or a bad thing? So we'll see both side of the coin. And first, there is arguments to be made that mind wandering is good. It can lead to creative thoughts. For example, if I give you an object like a brick, a picture of a brick, and I ask you to come up with creative use of that object, like, for example, you can use it as a paperclip, you can use it as an object to throw if you lost your keys in the window, you can use it in many, many different ways. And basically, you're more creative if I let you mind wander. So if I tell you what can you do with that brick, and I give you 2 minutes to just do nothing, your mind will start wandering, but you will get more creative when I ask you to write your answers. And then there's also, as I'll show you in a second, arguments that when your mind is wandering, your brain is resting. So that's one of the first experiments I did, in which I asked people to count their breath in the lab up to 10. And whenever they arrive at 10, they were supposed to start counting again. That's a very boring and typical meditation task. And then I asked them to press a button whenever they realize they lost the count. So they don't know what's the next number, and then just press the button. And what I did is that I analyzed their brain waves after they press the button, when they're concentrated, and before, when they're mind wandering. And for this, I use EEG Lab, which is software I developed. This is the most used software for analyzing brain data. It's free, but it's supported by the US government. This is the way I collect the brain waves. These are brain waves. And then I make these representation here. When it's red, it means I have high amplitude brain waves. And when it's blue, it means I have low amplitude brainwave. And I can also, put that back on the head of the person, or look inside the brain what's going on. But basically what I found for this specific task is that as they were doing the task, I was also playing some sounds. So I had like this one. We can't really hear it. So there's a beep and boop. So basically they hear beeps and boops. And this is very typical task in experimental psychology, where these capture people's attention. And we can measure how much the brain is engaged by these sounds. And we can measure when they were mind wandering. So just before they press the button to tell the experimenter that, they realized they were mind wandering, and after. And what we found is that whenever they're mind wandering, the brain response is lower. And this is an indication that the brain is at rest because we observe something similar during the first stage of sleep. The brain becomes much less responsive to external stimuli. So that's an indication that mind wandering corresponds to a resting state of the brain. And this was, by the way, the first paper, to my knowledge, to be published where we looked at brain data, and the analysis of the brain data only depended on the introspection of the subject. So whatever people were feeling internally, there was no stimulus. There were some stimulus, but they didn't have to respond to the stimulus. So that's one of the first experiments where this was purely neuroscience experiment based on purely introspection. Now there's another groups of studies which shows that mind wandering is bad. First, it's bad based on all the Hindu tradition, in the sense, it represents the monkey mind. The mind jumping from ideas to ideas in an incoherent and non-productive way, and also doing that during meditation. And there's a study from Harvard about 10 years ago where I did the study myself. So basically, you had to sign up with your cell phone, and about twice a day, you receive a text message saying, what are you doing right now? And are you mind wandering? So you were stopping whatever you were doing. I remember sometimes I was on my bike, sometimes I was at work, and then you would just answer a couple of questions. And you do that twice a day for about a month. And they did that on 5,000 people. And when they realized is when people were saying, oh, I was not concentrated, I was mind wandering right now, they were much less happy when they were compared to when they were concentrated. Even when they were actually mind wandering about pleasant experiences, when they were not mind wandering, they're more happy than they were when they were mind wandering about future vacation, for example. And it could be any time during the day. So this wasn't necessarily linked to asking them when they're work. It could be when they're watching TV, all kinds of activities. So if mind wandering is detrimental, how can we do to curb our mind wandering, especially to curb unpleasant mind wandering? And so I present many tactics in the book. I'm going to talk here specifically about meditation practice and neurofeedback. So meditation practice. So first, you can get a mantra to try to, get more concentrated. Like this character says, meditation is just too hard. How do you keep your thoughts in your mind for this long? Well, you can just use a very simple mantra. Here he has dinner, dinner, dinner. But there's obviously other mantras. So that's what we tested. Does meditation help to curb mind wandering? And I did these studies in Rishikesh in India. One of the reasons is we were able to find a lot of meditators over there, and meditators who meditate like several hours a day, which are hard to find in the Western world because we're so busy. And so that's the experiment we're doing. Basically, we just ask the person, just do your meditation, and randomly, every minute or so, the computer, a voice in the computer was asking them some question. Please rate the depth of your meditation. Please rate the depth of your mind wandering, and also please rate how tired you are. So we could see the link between mind wandering and tiredness. So we had 24 subjects, and 12 were expert meditators, and 12 were beginning meditators. And what we're interested in also, we studied their brainwaves. We're interested in the period before and after. So what happens just before we ask them the questions? And this is what we found. We found the meditators, the experienced practitioner, spend much more time concentrated than mind wandering. So med is meditation. They spend about 80% of their time meditating and 20% mind wandering. The beginners, on the other hand, spent about 50% mind wandering and 50% meditating. And this is consistent with other studies that show that over 8-week training, people who do 8-week training have less mind wandering after the training. So this is one study, and another one we did was on neurofeedback, because I mean, meditation is nice, but we like technology. So can you do the same with neurofeedback? So neurofeedback, this is the experiment we did. This is one of my students right here. You're in front of the screen, and then we ask them, use a meditation technique to try to influence the color of the square, and specifically try to increase theta power. So the power in the theta band is about 5 hertz, and the power is specific to concentration during meditation that we found in previous studies. So we're just telling them, upregulate the activity of your brain so it looks like you're concentrated. And for them, the instruction was just make this square less dark. Make this square less dark. Look at the square, and the color of the square depending on their brainwave. So if they made the square less dark, it means that they have more of the brainwave concentration type. We also studied their MRI before and after to see if there are structural changes. But basically, so this is one of the subjects doing the task, and you can see the color changing in real time based on their brainwave. And this is what we found. We found that the people who actually did the task saw their brainwave change in a way that was consistent. They produced more of the meditative brainwave that people, we call them the sham people. And the sham people, basically, they were in front of the screen the same way, but the color of the square didn't depend on their brainwave. It depended on the brainwave of somebody else. They didn't know, though. And this is a good control, because every time you come to the lab, you can have some bias. So we need to make the sham people, the control people, we need to make them believe that we're actually doing the experiment. And then we have a good control. So what we found is over the 8 sessions here, the brainwave increased consistent with them being more in the meditative state. And when we observe in terms of their performance, we observed in the cognitive task, we observed some difference in the population that got the real neurofeedback versus fake neurofeedback. We also did some mind-wandering tasks, and we didn't find strong results in these, but we did find that these tasks where you improve cognitive controls, which is also linked to mind-wandering. But where do thought really come from? So we're ions, and we need to look also, well, the thoughts, you have thoughts that might be originating from your environment and your past, but also there might be other types of thoughts. And I've played this video several times. I'm going to play it again. That's one of my preferred video, where we have Mathieu Ricard, who is one of the translator to the Dalai Lama. And here it was at the International Symposium of Contemplative Science in 2012. He was surrounded by some very prominent neuroscientists. So there's Wolfinger, and Evan Thompson is a philosopher. So it was a very mainstream conference. And he recalls that experience, which I'm going to play right now.
I want to just give one example. Because when I was discussing with my philosopher father, he was a completely unbeliever, agnostic, anything you want. And he was, one of the first things he took me on was about this really stupid stuff about all what I've been talking about. And so I told him, look, I'll tell you a story, and then you make whatever you want out of it. But what I promise you is I'm not telling you lies. So, one day I was in my hermitage in Darjeeling, living with my teacher, and I used to come to see him every night for many years to have teachings and so forth. And then one day I remember when I was a teenager, my uncle was in the seaside, and there's a lot of those rats that immigrated from America on ships that were destroying his pond. And he was a hunter, and he told me, why don't you go with a rifle and see if you find some rats. So I basically never hunted and didn't fish much, but somehow for some strange reason, I took that rifle and went there. I was 16 years old. So then one of the rat came and I shot, and the rat jumped. And I hope still now that I didn't really kill him. It was just surprise, but I don't know. In any case, when I was doing retreat, when I was 20 plus, and then one day that things came very clear in my mind. And I said, how could I ever conceive of doing something like that? Speak of lack of empathy. Not even imagine what it would be to be just a nice rat swimming there and someone just trying to kill. So unbelievable. So I could not believe that I had done something like that. And I said, well, I'm going to tell my teacher, sort of kind of confession. So at 5 o'clock, I went down from my hermitage, went to see my teacher. That time I didn't speak Tibetan, but his son was interpreting. And as usual, I sort of bowed down 3 times. And I looked at him and he was laughing at me, just heartily laughing. And telling something to his son. And when I came by, he said, how many animals did you kill in your life? He never ever asked me about my past, my youth, my stories. He knew I was coming, being an ex-scientist who decided to sort of live and receive teaching from him. He never asked me a question about my childhood of any kind. And at that very moment, he asked me that. And it looks very simple. It was not like suddenly there was some vibes and strange lights in the room. It was just like a nice joke. But just give me an explanation. I don't have one.
So that's also one of the questions we're interested at IONS. Where do these thoughts come from? You could say they're a type of mind wandering. His mind just went to that topic. I killed an animal. So, and also how did the thought come to his guru? And so that's what we point to as big C consciousness. And basically, our working model is you equal your brain. Yes, so that's the materialist reductionist hypothesis. Or no, and then you also have 2 possibilities. So here, consciousness can be an epiphenomenon. So you have the activity of the brain, the neurons, and you have what's called functional consciousness, and then you have phenomenal consciousness, the feeling of being alive. And this is what most neuroscientists would say. Consciousness is an epiphenomenon. Yes, it exists. The feeling of being alive exists, but it doesn't have any causal influence on the world. So it's the absence of free will. And I would say these days, you probably have more than 50% of people, of neuroscientists in that box, and about 30% in that box. And then the last 20% would be, no, consciousness can have a causal influence in the world. And consciousness can have a causal influence in the world. Again, you have 2 hypotheses. Maybe you just have a causal influence on the local neurons. It can't go outside the brain. And so then, there might not be psi, or it can have a non-local influence. And that's where, we stand at IONS. Does consciousness have a non-local influence on the world? And is consciousness, a fundamental property of nature? And this seems very far-fetched, but when you look at other physical theory, like for example, entanglement in quantum mechanics, where locality is everywhere. You have photons which are entangled, which means in different parts of the universe, where basically one flips and the other one will flip instantaneously at the speed of light. So it's like they're linked at the deep level. You have all kinds of weird stuff going on in physics. So we don't think, even though it's not currently part of the mainstream scientific model, we don't think it's necessarily so far-fetched. So show me the data. And first, I want to start with some experiments which are no longer controversial, but that our body is, our consciousness is linked to our environment in ways we don't necessarily suspect. For example, women's menstrual cycles is linked with the moon of the face. And this was just demonstrated recently, only in 2021, when they had enough data. Also, here they put subjects in artificial magnetic field, and they showed that people's brain, as measured using electroencephalogram, is responsive to the type of magnetic field. So we are influenced by the Earth magnetic field. And this is no longer controversial. We knew pigeon could do it. That's how they orient themselves to find their way. We didn't know that humans could do it, but this experiment does show that humans are also sensitive to the Earth magnetic field. And these other experiments is an extension of that, showing that not only we're sensitive to magnetic field, so that's the Earth here, Schumann resonance, we call it Schumann resonance, but we're also sensitive to sunspots and solar wind. And one reason, and this was measured, for example, with heart rate variability. So when your heart beats, it doesn't always beat exactly the same frequency. It changes slightly. And this variation is actually a measure of stress. When your heart is very regular, it means you're very stressed. When you're about to have a heart attack, your heart is like a clock, basically. But if your heart varies a lot, it means it's a kind of signature of health. So here we see about less than an hour after here, I think these are solar spots, we can see an increase in HRV, so stress. Our body becomes stressed just because we're solar spots. And one interpretation of this is, the solar wind and solar spot, probably to a lesser extent, influence the Earth magnetic field, which can influence them. So, there is some kind of physical explanation to what might be the case. But it's also show that we're absolutely not independent of our environment. And also, this could be, support for weak telepathy. For example, there's a big stellar event and a big transformation in the Earth magnetic field, and all the humans, will feel it at the same time. And then you also have mental experiences. So we did this survey a couple of years ago, where we asked meditators if they had ever experienced specific mental experience during their meditation. And so here, it was a long questionnaire, and we had about 1,200 people responding to the questionnaire. And basically, the bar here shows at least once, and then you have more than once, etc. But if at this point here, for example, more than 50% of the people said they had experienced non-physical entity in their awareness, vision, or hearing, clairvoyance or telepathy, or a connection with a teacher or guru. So it doesn't mean that these experiences are necessarily real. They're real to the people, but is it true telepathy? But these people were convinced this was a true telepathy. So this makes it worthy of study for us. And one of the research I've been doing is on mediumship and channeling. Why? Because it's relatively easy to find psychic and mediums. It's the only paranormal job. So you can find them everywhere on Yelp, on the Google. And in comparison to psychics, mediums are relatively easy to test. You go see a medium and they try to convince you that they're in contact with one of your deceased relative. And also it involves extreme emotions, such as death, which we know are associated with reports of paranormal reports. For example, when people become aware, that some of their people they love has, died, even though they might be thousands of miles. That's a relatively common thing that people report. They also were previous reputable studies. And here, I was not interested, okay, are they communicating with spirits or not? I was just interested, do they have access to informations that, they are not supposed to be able to access based on the current scientific model, which is that, telepathy could be telepathy with their subjects. It could be anything. So it doesn't have to be spirits, although, of course, it could be spirits, it could be anything. So we're just testing here whether consciousness is non-local to an extent without, putting much specifics. And so this is one of the study we did. We did many of these, but here we have 12 professional mediums and 12 controls. And then we had 200 pictures. And then some of the pictures, people were died of a heart attack. Some of the people pictured died of a car accident. And some of the people people were killed by firearm. And so we're showing the picture, and we're asking the medium or the control. We also had controls. How do you think this person died? And they see the picture for a couple of seconds, and then they press a button and it moves on to the next picture. And the reason we use so many pictures is that we want to run powerful statistics. If you can guess 10 pictures, it might not be incredible, but if you can guess 200, it's very unlikely you can just do that by chance. And I've shown that before. I apologize for the people who've already seen it. I like to do this little experiments here. So you are the subject now. And I'm going to show you 3 pictures. One of this person died of a heart attack. The other person died by firearm. And the other person died of a car accident. So if you can concentrate. And so first person, is it heart attack, car accident, or firearm? Second picture, heart attack, car accident, firearm. Third picture, heart attack, car accident, or firearm. So here is the result. So this person died of a heart attack, the second one auto crash, and the third one was killed by a firearm. And we show 200 of these. These are public pictures we found on the internet, and also in the consent form for the subject, we tell them, this is not a game, we want to respect, people who have passed. And so this is also what we found. So the chance is 33%. You have 3 categories. So you have 33% chance of being correct. And you can see here the bars are more on top of the 33% than on the bottom. And you have the 2 groups of subjects. And we found that the odds, what we call the odds against chance, is 1 in 41, which means that it's unlikely that it just occurs by chance. Basically, if we run the experiment 41 times, it should only happen by chance once. So the fact we run it only once and found that the bar on top here of the line, we had more response on top of the line than below, show that it's very unlikely to just happen by chance. So this is in support of the hypothesis that the subjects were able to detect the cause of death. Although we can see here also that, they are not at 50, they're not at 100%. None of the mediums are 100%. Each bar here is one person. We also found some difference between mediums and control. And, this is we recorded their brainwaves. So this is the presentation of the face, and this is the difference between mediums and control. So there seems they are doing something different. Unfortunately, we didn't find that mediums were better than control. So it seems like if it's a real ability, it's common to might be common to everybody. This is the paper we've published on the subject. We try to publish in mainstream journal, Frontier in Psychology, Explore, or Brain Cognition, as I showed you before. And a lot of our paper, the scientific paper get ranked based on how many people cite them and how many people view them. And our papers get a lot of interest in the scientific community, even though scientists are very shy to look at these, to be public about these topics. They seem to be very interested by the research we do. And so from my perspective, more research is needed. Obviously one study doesn't show anything, even if it's significant. It needs to be reproduced by other people. And eventually, it is my belief that real scientists get convinced by the data. So when the data is unequivocal, it's going to be become a mainstream. And for me right now, as we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, and I like to compare our research, with how the Greeks were considering electricity more than 2,000 years ago. This is a phase from ancient Greece, and you have electric eel right here. So they knew about electricity more than 2,000 years ago, but it took 2,000 years, to really for us to harness, what you can really do with electricity. So from my perspective, we're at the same stage, with telepathy or non-local consciousness, is that we're seeing, bits and pieces there, but we're not really exploiting all the potential. And I'd like to come back to mind wandering. And so this is a thought by a quote by Rupert Spira that I really like. Thoughts are just like birds flying across the sky of awareness. They appear and disappear in the boundless space of our being. And I want to thank you for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Arnaud, for this presentation, and really happy to say we have time for some questions. So I see some of you have already put in questions. And if you haven't put in your question yet, go ahead and put that into the Q&A box. So great. I'm just going to start at the top. And the first question is there any correlation between frequent mind wandering and the onset of dementia in older people? Is there any research that you've seen on that?
I haven't seen specifically research on that. There is research on mind wandering and attention deficit disorder, mind wandering and depression. But when you're depressed, you tend to have more negative thoughts. So onset of dementia, I think, there's also some depressive symptoms sometimes. So, it could be linked to, increase in negative mind wandering. Not so much the quantity as much as the quality.
Great. And Jeff is asking, can it be the case of a stimulus initiating a chain of associative thought and imagination?
Totally. I mean, that's the way our mind works, like all the time. You hear a bird and it reminds you of your childhood, and then, you go on tangent. That's also why it's so interesting, because as you look in meditation, as you see how your mind, jump from thoughts to thoughts, you learn more about yourself and your own pattern. That's why I became interested in mind wandering myself, just to discover, the inner working of my mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really useful to have the science to say what's actually happening in our brains whenever our minds are wandering. And we have actually a follow-up question from your last answer, which is just how is mind wandering related to attention deficit disorder? If you want to say something about that.
Yeah, so kids and adults who have attention deficit disorder have problems focusing. So so mind wandering tend to distract them more than other people. You start mind wandering, you might be able to come back to what you're doing, but they go on tangents and they have a harder time to come back to that. And it could be linked to the fact that their brain and their mind is more asleep to some extent, because one of the drug we give to, unfortunately, to ADHD kids is a kind of it's Ritalin. Ritalin is a kind of amphetamine, so it's just wake them up, and as they wake them up, they're more they're mind wandering less. So this is linked to one of the first study I showed where, mind wandering is a kind of sleep of the brain. Your brain is resting, etc. And it could be that your brain is resting too much. And so, yeah. And that's also linked to the hyperactivity, because they're seeking external stimulation to wake up. And
Right. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, thank you so much. And we have a question from Existential Bob. Love that name. Bob is asking, does this involve brainwave entrainment with differing frequencies being played in each ear? And then he also asks about binaural beats. And any thoughts you have on that?
yeah, the brainwave story is not simple, because the brainwave, so you have cognitive controls. First brainwave, after more than 20 years working on brainwaves, you realize usually when the brainwave is present is when the brain is at rest. Like, for example, you close your eyes, you have more of the alpha rhythm, the first brainwave ever discovered at 10 hertz. And it just shows the neurons are happy, oscillating together. But it's not working. So basically, you're interested as much as the increase in brainwave as the decrease in brainwave, where it shows, when the brainwave decreases, it shows, oh, the neurons are working at something, they're doing something. So that's what also we were interested, not only in the increase, but also in the decrease. And we're specifically interested for mind wandering in what we call frontal midline theta. So that's over this area right here. That's the neuron in this region, the frontal cortex, which oscillate in the theta band, basically. And we observe that when people are meditating, they increase, activity in that region. So it becomes more at rest, if you want, in that specific frequency bands. And when they did neurofeedback, that's what we entrained people at. We said, okay, increase this frontal midline theta rhythm. And when they did that, they did become better at cognitive control.
Great, great. And this might tie into a few questions I'm seeing about how do we focus our mind better? There's someone asking about ADHD for a child or just for themselves, how to focus the mind better. So maybe you can give us some tips.
Yeah, and I mean, we all want to, focus more, and that's what, that's what's funny with mind wandering is that when you mind wanders, you want to focus more. If I ask you, do not think of the pink elephant, for the next minute, you're gonna think about the pink elephant 20 times. You can't, with just pure will, you can't control your mind, more than a few seconds. Then it just does its own thing. So all the techniques which have to do with taming mind wandering are behavioral technique practices, kind of meditation practices where, you practice observing yourself. And then, through that, you realize, oh yeah, when my mind does this, it's not beneficial to me, and then somehow you rewire yourself to have less of that. But if you just try to exert pure will, you usually get frustrated and you increase mind wandering rather than decreasing it.
Great. So like many of the traditions who say just observe rather than kind of
Yes.
will. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. We have some questions on from Susan saying any relationship between hemisphere dominance and mind wandering. And someone else was asking what parts of the brain light up when mind wandering is happening.
Yeah. So the specialization, hemispheric specialization, was very is still it is real. Like the language is in the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere is more into non language task, but it was exaggerated really, and this dates back to 30 years ago, where people were just seeing through that lens, right cortex versus left cortex. And these days we have technique where we can really go into more details, and so it's not much, it's more like this specific brain area. Like, for example, for mind wandering, it's frontal midline theta, so it's what we call the cingulate cortex in that region. that's associated with cognitive control. So yes, the specialization right, left versus left, is still real. But and with mind wandering, especially when you have internal thoughts, you have like the language area, the Broca area, and the Wernicke area, and the left cortex, which are more active. But yeah, it's the whole orchestration of the brain. It's not one brain area, doing it all.
Great. Thanks for that.
And in studies showed that it might be possible for people who have split brain. So split brain is like if you have some kind of epilepsy, they sever the two hemisphere, so they barely talk each other anymore. And it seems that when that's the case, the two brains start to mind wander separately. At least that's what the data seem to show. You can get a different response from different hemisphere.
That's also fascinating. So they can take on their own mind wandering at the same time.
Yeah.
It's great. Great. We've got a question from Sophie who says, except for meditation or a mantra, she says, I suppose you can use, quote, real magic as well, instead of that to have the same result, meaning not mind wandering or not. So can you say something about the psi or real magic?
Well, we don't have the expert here. Dean is writing a book on real magic. He's written a book already on real magic, and he has another one coming up on the techniques, the actual practice. So I think we would need to ask him these questions, because I don't know.
Great. So Sophie, come back for our webinar with Dean and we'll infuse that in. That's great. Prashant is asking, is mind wandering connected to any of the neurotransmitters, for example, lower dopamine?
I don't think we know the answer to that question. Dopamine and serotonin, when you do take agonist of these neurotransmitter, which means like you take some drug, which is, going to bind to this region, like psychedelic drugs, for example, you do have drastic changes, in your mind wandering and, first person experience. So yeah, the answer would be yes, but it's not necessarily a simple answer. Is this neurotransmitter that's associated with mind wandering? It's more like, everything influence, everything else.
Great. And we have a few different questions about different techniques. So I don't know if you study different kinds of meditation and which ones might be more effective or not. We have a question about the difference between mantra meditation or humming or other techniques. So do you have any research on different kinds of techniques?
We actually do. We did an experiment in India where we tested different meditation traditions, 4 of them. My take on this is that the technique that works is the one you can stick to. It's like if there is a great technique and you just do it for a week, it's probably won't help very much. But if there is another technique, you can do it for several years. It's probably more efficacious. So I remember when I went to India 15 years ago, I was with an Indian friend of mine who took me to see his guru, and we did this ceremony, Indian chanting. And then the guru asked me, "How was it for you? This is so different to what you do." And I said, well, it's like when I meditate, my mind drift off, wandering, came back to the chant, got into the chant, and then it went drift off again. And then he smiled. I don't know if he agreed or not, but yeah, it seems like, yeah. So you can observe your mind wandering basically in any meditation technique. And maybe the best one is the one you can stick to.
Great. Yeah. What's the one that works for each individual?
Yeah.
Gary asked, do you have any information on the mind function of shamans? I know you've studied in some meditation halls. Have you done any work with shamans?
I haven't done work with shamans specifically. I've done some work with psychedelics. So some of the shaman take psychedelics to have visions, and we did observe changes, not so much in mind wandering as much as in the feeling of expansion. And maybe this is reflected in your thoughts as well. Yeah. So mind wandering of shaman, yeah, I don't have a very specific answer.
Absolutely. And we have a question here about how doing this research has affected you as both as a researcher and a meditator. So how has understanding about the brain changed how you think about your own practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is, it made me aware, of the importance of mind wandering. Especially, I'm a scientist, so I believe what science says to a large extent. And now it's very mainstream. Mind wandering is very mainstream. You have like probably more than when I started almost 20 years ago, there were maybe 3 people in the world studying mind wandering. It was very fringe. But these days there's hundreds. Meditation, mind wandering are very mainstream. So I think it's it brought, from my meditation practice, I knew this was very important, but also from, doing the work, I got also to mind wander about mind wandering and, do all these experiments on myself. So yeah, I learned a lot, about the fact that you can't control your mind wandering, but you can control what Kabat-Zinn calls the second arrow. So when you have negative, mind wandering, whether you blame yourself for it or not, or whether you let it go.
Absolutely. So kind of how our response is once we notice that we're mind wandering seems like it's also important. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also getting on to do some meditation practice. The one I think, so I practiced TM, Transcendental Meditation, for a couple of years. And they have a special theory about mind wandering, but it's just bubble. It's bubbling up, from the bottom of your consciousness. And it's good. Mind wandering is during meditation is good because when I was a Zen meditator, I would blame myself. You're told not to judge yourself, but you can't help it. I would blame myself. Oh, I had a terrible meditation session. I just mind wander all the time. So then, when I did TM, it was like, oh, I had a fantastic meditation session. Lots of thoughts bubbled up, and I released lots of thoughts. And yeah, so it's also helpful to have a good attitude, about mind wandering, not seeing it, oh, this is a hindrance. I need to get rid of mind wandering. If you do that, yeah, it's going to get worse.
It's a great tip of how to react once we discover mind wandering because it's
Yeah.
going to happen to everyone, right?
Yeah.
So just time for probably a couple more questions. Joan is asking about astrology. I know you talked about sunspots. And have you looked into anything with astrology, like Mercury in a different sign or anything like that? Is there any research you know of about astrology and the mind?
Yeah. So it's Mercury retrograde right now. I know that because we have a astrology expert in the team, and all the tech went fine so far. So let's cross our fingers. And truth is, I haven't done any study myself. I know in his book, Dean has some results on the phase of the moon and how this can influence psi. Yeah, but that's the extent of my knowledge.
Great. Great. And this will be our final question. It's a big one, but maybe you can just speak to ION's orientation to this question. Bob asks, is there a universal consciousness or does the brain create consciousness? I know that's at such the core of many questions on consciousness research. So maybe you can speak to
Mhm.
that as an ION scientist.
Yeah, I mean, it is my hypothesis but the brain doesn't create consciousness, but there is universal consciousness. That's like on the same footing with the other forces, of nature. And that's why we're doing experiment, to show that it is a real hypothesis. And I also like, whenever I talk to I was presenting at Harvard 2 weeks ago, and I got the chance to meet Steven Pinker, the philosopher, who is very much a materialist reductionist. But I had, I'm a neuroscientist, so I asked him a neuroscientific question. I said, let's say you have this camera, that's just like, it's a fantastic camera that doesn't exist yet, but it can film inside the brain with picosecond, like very, very fine timing, every single neuron, what's happening. And I take the movie of somebody being aware, conscious, and I slow it down. I slow it down to where I can see, every chemical reaction in slow motion, etc. Where's consciousness here? Where's subjectivity? It's like it's just purely mechanical. And that's why, I think the model where consciousness arises from the brain is not a good model. He
Great.
could have
And I know
answered the question, by the way. He said like, oh, consciousness, like the wetness of water, etc. But yeah, it was going to concepts. So he was like bringing back to concept. But to have concept, you need consciousness. So it was, from my perspective, it was like circular, his answer.
absolutely. And we have some papers that we can send out too, really about the non-local consciousness that the science team is studying. So for those of you who are interested in the science, we'll send out a follow-up link on that too. So great. Well, I can't believe we are coming to the end of our time. I would love to give you a chance just to have any final closing comments and anything else about your book, which actually comes out in just 4 days. December 19th, pre-order is available right now for your book on mind wandering. And just any closing thoughts for us, Arnaud?
Yeah, I'd like to repeat, this quote from Rupert Spira, which I really like. It's thoughts are just like birds flying across the sky of awareness. They appear and disappear in the boundless space of our being.
Beautiful. It's a good reminder maybe to have by our meditation cushion or something, just to trust the boundlessness. Yeah. Yeah. That's great, Arnaud. And as we are closing up here, I want to just share a couple of announcements. I just mentioned that Arnaud's book will be coming out on December 19th, and you can pre-order now. Mark just put that link in the chat. So we would love to have you participate, leave a review, let us know what you think about the book and the techniques in it. And finally, IONS-free programs, as well as our scientific research, are almost entirely funded by the generous gifts from our members and donors. So just huge, huge gratitude to everyone who supports the mission of IONS in whatever way that is for you, whether that means donating, coming to this webinars, or spreading the message of interconnection of science and consciousness. We are so grateful for the support, and we're so grateful for all your questions today and interactions. It's been really, really lovely. So if you have enjoyed today's offering and would like to make a gift, please go to noetic.org/give. And thank you again, Arnaud, for this amazing conversation. I'm really excited personally to read the book and have a conversation within our community about mind wandering and ways that we can more focus our mind for our own happiness and health. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being with us today. Until next time.